I'd like us to look at the 10th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America. And one of the things I go to is I use something called the Legal Information Institute at Cornell University Law School. And you'll notice it gives us a little, so this is usually a default that you can find in the major search engine, which I utilize. But ordinarily you can look for LII or law.cornell.edu, and you get a relatively, and I believe, perfect and up to date as of 5 p.m. the day before website that looks at all the U.S. laws. It's an incredible task as these things grow. I'm not certain they can keep up with the regulatory power, but I'm going to leave this up for a second so that you can look at the 10th Amendment. Well, maybe I'll read it to you. The 10th Amendment helps to define the concept of federalism. And notice there's a click through here if we want to. The relationship between federal and state governments. So let me pause for a second there, because federal governments are all of the states, and then the state governments are all of the municipalities and the broader state government. So to the extent that the city of Ferguson is different than the city of Florissant, we have some freedom in association and in control as we define what we want around us in our neighborhoods. Do we want manufacturing facilities? Do we want storefronts? Do we want a major mall? Do we want to steal major malls from one another as municipalities? I think as we look at this, we can see that the design was to try to give as little control to government as possible and to retain as much as you could for yourselves. But that can be challenging as we encroach upon one another. We sometimes cry out for freedom. I need to stop their behavior because it interferes with mine. There are certain things that we absolutely want to do that too, but I wanted you to look at, as federal activity has increased, so too has the problem of reconciling state and national interests as they apply to the federal powers to tax, to police, and to regulations such as wage and hour laws. We can make pretty strong arguments that a national wage and hour law is not necessarily in the best interests of all the citizens of all the states and all the municipalities. What it certainly does is it consolidates power in Washington, and it also gives power to the people who are able to influence the people in power in Washington. We've got a real dichotomy of who are the oligarchs behind the throne. It's really interesting. But notice the ones they don't have links to: disclosure of personal information and record-keeping systems. The IRS, it appears, has become an open book, particularly for what are 501c4 nonprofit organizations, particularly those related to political speech. One would think the First Amendment would give these groups the right to act as a group and not necessarily put who's behind them out front. You don't have to read 1984 to see some of the hazards of the federal government releasing tax return information or asking for donor names. This is a really popular little deal now. We've got to do donor disclosures so that people can do shaming, so that they can go to their captive media and get it out that XYZ once time gave money to a group that did not favor gay marriage. Are we really benefiting by that, or is that really a clamp down on free speech. You know, money is part of speech in the federal system and in the state system. And you can see it by looking at the amount of money that people spend in order to keep $150,000 a year jobs. You know, it's incredible. But I wanted, you know, really the purpose here is to look at Amendment 10. And the 10th Amendment is the last of the Bill of Rights. And it's oftentimes ignored or shunted aside. I've had a lot of friends tell me that, oh, states' rights was settled by the Civil War. I'm not certain I know what they mean, but I guess they mean that the federal government always has the right to come in and shut down states and reconstitute states as the federal government deems appropriate. That seems pretty contrary to the original founding. And if we look at the variety of states at the original founding, as well as we've spread across the continent, we see a tremendous variety in those states. In fact, the Supreme Court of the United States of America celebrates that in at least one decision when it talks about the laboratory of the states. You know, that it may be that much like Canada had its healthcare system start in the province of Saskatchewan, a Western and pretty socialist, from what I understand, province. You know, and then it filtered back and it got modified as the people of Quebec came up against it and the people of Ontario. You know, these are huge provinces. Canadian provinces are almost all at least a third of the United States in total land mass, if not even bigger. Quebec is ginormous. Anyway, you know, those Canadian provinces in Europe are the whole continent. You know, it's really kind of interesting, but not as deeply peopled. So let's look at Amendment 10. This is kind of the bookend, if you will. If we look at the preamble to the Constitution, it says, "We the people give these powers to the United States." There were people like Patrick Henry and others who thought that the first word should be, "We the states give the federal government this power." But it was thought wiser to talk about "we the people." That puts a lot of pressure on people because sometimes it's easier to just hand it over to the government and think the government will do it well. And we sometimes forget that most governments are about the increase of power in individuals, or at least that's what they become as people spend more time in those powerful positions. They see themselves as the do-all, be-all, end-all of American life. And, you know, it's our job as citizens to come in and shake things up periodically. But I still haven't got, you know, we're 8.5 minutes in and I haven't still talked about it. But reading this, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution. So we'd look in Articles 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, recalling that in Article 5, I believe it is, any law created lawfully under the Constitution by the United States of America is the supreme law of the land. All right, so we've got this balance that if the federal government has been given the power, then it has to recognize too that this power, anytime they exercise that power, they may be limiting people's ability to affect change locally. If we look at most human experience, we do better in smaller groups. Smaller towns, you know, the old Roman concept of the 100. Now, that was the 100 landed people, and we've moved away from that. Some would say fortunately, others not so, but we've opened up the speech to all people. You know, and even though the language at the time we could dispute whether this "to the people" really means anybody other than the landed gentry. Its long-term effect is, as we've moved it, as we've added women to the voting rolls, as we've given former slaves complete citizenship rights. We're still working on that, I grant you, but as we've added more and more people to the voting rolls and eliminated in every state the need to own property in order to vote, we've grown this government, and we've also grown the power, hopefully reserved to the people. All right. Power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution. For the most part, we're going to look in Articles 1, 2, and 3. Was it given to Congress? Is it a power given to the executive? Or is it a power given to the states? Then the next part is nor prohibited by it to the states. And I remember solving this riddle. That phrase, nor prohibited by it to the states, means, to me, I still struggle with this, and somebody may correct me. It is, if we've got the power, the states can't walk in and use it. But notice that here's the biggest power, I think, in this amendment, that the powers not given are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So the essential framing of our national government is we the people give powers to the federal government because the states might abuse those powers, things like commerce, bankruptcy, patents, all the listed powers given Article 1 under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution of the United States of America, and we can also say Article 1, Section 9. The majority of the power is given there, and it's given to the Congress, not to the executive. The executive has seized power over time, and Congress has said, hey, that's a hot potato, why don't you take it? That's emblematic, if you will, of the problems of giving power to government, is that once we give them up, it's pretty rare we can get them back. Now, maybe we don't handle them well anyway, I'll grant you that, but we're generally better off maybe trying that at the state or local level and seeing if the states can individually solve these problems. One of the best examples is healthcare and who gets it, who pays for it. When they talk about the need for universal healthcare, they're really talking about people's ability to pay for it. And we may be able to, at a state level, design systems through insurance companies, through private pay systems, through health savings accounts, or other things like that, where individuals retain more power, and the individuals and their physicians retain the power over that individual's treatment regimen, as opposed to a bunch of oligarchs, unelected people who are wiser than all of us, sitting in Washington or sitting in little carols somewhere scattered throughout the country, who are given federal power over local matters. All right. And, the last challenge for us is that we, the people, are the people who have to put the checks on our own government. And that means transfers of power to them, at least from my thinking. Others are going to disagree with me, but this is in here as a bookend. We the people give, we the people keep. And what we've given away, we rarely get back. So I meant this to be a much shorter video, but unfortunately, there's a lot in here. There's a lot in our government that, sometimes we're just told, trust me, and then we do. I leave it to you whether that is a good resolution of governance and freedom. Thanks.